The morning started like any other morning on the mining planet called Kepler 442b. The sun was rising over the rocky hills, and the air smelled like metal dust from the deep mines. June Lee was getting ready for another day of hard work in the underground tunnels where they dug for rare metals that Earth needed for the war. His wife Hannah was already in the kitchen making breakfast for their 2 children. Dami was 8 years old and loved to draw pictures of the strange plants that grew on this planet. Her little brother Wook was only 5, and he always asked too many questions about everything he saw. The family had been living on this mining colony for 3 years now. June had volunteered to come here when Earth needed more workers. To dig the special metals, the pay was good and they said it was safe. The Vorthon aliens had signed a peace treaty and promised not to attack human colonies anymore. But June sometimes worried when he saw the news about fighting in other parts of space. The colony had about 200 people living there. Most were families like the Lees who came to work in the mines. There were also teachers for the small school and doctors for the medical center and engineers who kept all the machines running. Everyone knew everyone else and they all helped each other. When times were hard that morning, Hannah walked Dami and Wook to school like she did every day. The school was a small building in the center of the colony where about 30 children learned their lessons. The teacher was a kind woman named Mrs. Park who had taught children on Earth before coming to this planet. The children loved her stories about faraway places. June kissed his wife and children goodbye and went to work in mine, shaft number 7. It was the deepest mine on the planet, and it took him almost an hour to ride the elevator down to where they were digging. He worked with 12 other men operating the big machines that cut through rock and sorted the valuable metals from ordinary stone. At exactly 10:30 in the morning, the attack began. The Vorthon ships came down from the sky like black storm clouds. They were huge and made no sound as they landed around the colony. The ships opened and out came the Vorthon warriors. These aliens were 8 feet tall with 4 arms, each arm as strong as 3 human arms. Their skin looked like the hard shell of insects, and they had 4 red eyes that glowed in the dark. The Vorthons carried weapons that shot beams of deadly energy that could cut through steel. The humans had some small weapons for protection against wild animals, but nothing that could fight against military alien technology. The colony security chief tried to send a message to Earth, asking for help, but the aliens had blocked all communications. June heard the explosions from deep underground and knew something terrible was happening. He and the other miners tried to use the elevator to get back to the surface, but it had stopped working. The aliens had cut the power to trap the miners below ground. The men used emergency ladders to climb up the long mine shaft, but it took them almost 2 hours. When June finally reached the surface, he saw that his worst fears had come true. The colony was burning and alien soldiers were walking through the streets. The Vorthons were not trying to capture anyone or steal anything. They were killing every human they found, including women and children and old people. June ran toward the school where his children were, but he found Vorthon soldiers blocking the way. One of the aliens saw him and raised its weapon. June grabbed a plasma cutter from a nearby construction site. It was a tool for cutting metal, but it might work as a weapon. The alien fired first, but June jumped behind a concrete barrier. The fight lasted only a few minutes. June was brave and desperate, but he was just one man with a construction tool fighting against a trained alien warrior with military weapons. The plasma beam from the alien's gun burned through June's chest and he fell to the ground thinking about his wife and children. Hannah had been in the food processing center when the attack started. She heard the explosions and saw the alien ships landing. She ran toward the school to get Dami and Wook, but there were aliens everywhere. The streets were full of smoke and the sound of energy weapons and people screaming. She reached the school and found Mrs. Park trying to hide the children in a storage closet in the basement. Hannah helped move the little ones into the dark room and told them to be very quiet and not make any sounds. The children were crying, but they tried to be brave like their parents had taught them. 2 Vorthon soldiers came into the school building. Their heavy footsteps echoed in the hallways as they searched each room. Mrs. Park stood in front of the closet door trying to protect the children inside. One of the aliens pushed her aside with one of its 4 arms. The teacher fell and hit her head on the concrete floor. The aliens found the children hiding in the closet. Little Dami held her brother Wook close to her and whispered that everything would be okay. The Vorthons looked down at the frightened human. children with their glowing red eyes. One of them spoke into a communication device in their clicking language. Hannah tried to fight the aliens with her bare hands, but they were too strong. One alien held her, while the other one pointed its weapon at the children. She begged them to let the children go and take her instead, but the Vorthans did not care about her words. They had come here to send a message to all humans. The alien leader was Prince Kex Tar, a member of the royal family who commanded this attack. He had ordered his soldiers to make sure that every human death was recorded on video. The footage would be sent to Earth and all other human colonies to show what happened to humans who dared to mine in space that the Vorthans claimed belonged to them. Prince Kextar walked through the colony, personally executing survivors while his soldiers filmed everything. He wanted humans to see his face and know that the royal family of the Vorthan Empire had ordered this massacre. When he found Junli dying near the construction site, he made sure the cameras captured him killing the human miner. The aliens spent 6 hours killing every person in the colony. They destroyed the buildings and the machines and even killed the animals that humans had brought from Earth. When they were finished, 237 humans were dead, including 42 children. The youngest victim was a baby, only 3 months old. Before leaving the planet, the Vorthans uploaded all the video footage to the Galactic Communication Network. Every human world received the message showing the massacre. Prince Kextar appeared on screen, laughing in the alien clicking language while standing over the bodies of dead human children. Message that came with the video was simple in multiple languages. Humans who tried to expand into Vorthan territory would die. Humans who resisted alien authority would die. Human children who were born in the wrong places would die. The Vorthan Empire was superior and humans were insects to be stepped on. The aliens left the planet thinking they had won a great victory. They believed that seeing dead children would make humans afraid and weak. They thought humans would abandon their colonies and beg for peace. But the Vorthans had never studied human history very carefully. They did not understand what humans did when someone killed their innocent people, especially children. The video reached Earth within 12 hours and was seen by billions of humans across the galaxy. The Earth Defense Council held an emergency meeting that lasted all night. When the sun rose, they had made their decision. This was not a military matter anymore. This was personal, and the response would be personal, too. Walter Kim was 73 years old and lived in a small house in Atlanta with his wife Dorothy, who was 68. They had been married for 45 years, and their neighbors thought they were just another quiet, retired couple who spent their days gardening and watching old movies on television. Every morning, Walter would water the tomato plants in their backyard, while Dorothy fed the birds that came to visit their bird feeder. They went to church on Sundays and played cards with other old people at the community center on Wednesday nights. Their 3 grown children lived in different cities and visited during holidays with their own families. What the neighbors did not know was that Walter and Dorothy Kim had spent 30 years working for a secret part of the Earth government that did not officially exist. They had been partners in the Black Operations Division, which handled missions that were too dangerous or too secret for regular soldiers. Walter had been known by the codename Ghost because he could get into any building or base without being seen and complete his mission, without leaving any evidence that he had been there. He could speak 12 languages and knew how to kill a person in 47 different ways using only his hands. Dorothy had been his partner in every mission for 3 decades. Her codename was Smoke because she could disguise herself as anyone and disappear into crowds like she had never existed. She was an expert in poisons and could make deadly substances from common household items. She also knew how to hack any computer system ever built. Together, they had completed over 200 missions on Earth and on colonies throughout human space. They had eliminated dictators and crime bosses and enemy agents who threatened human security. They had saved millions of lives by stopping wars before they could start and preventing terrorist attacks that would have killed innocent people. But that was all in the past. Now they were just old people who complained about their arthritis and worried about their cholesterol levels. Walter wore thick glasses and walked with a slight limp from an old injury. Dorothy had gray hair and always carried a purse full of medicine bottles for various health problems. On Tuesday morning, they were eating breakfast and watching the news when the special report came on the television. The reporter was talking about the massacre on Kepler 442b and showing some of the video footage that the Vorthan aliens had broadcast. Walter and Dorothy watched in silence as they saw the bodies of dead human families, including small children. Dorothy turned off the television and looked at her husband. They had seen terrible things during their years of service, but nothing had ever affected them, like watching those alien monsters laugh while standing over dead human children. Walter nodded slowly, and Dorothy knew he was thinking the same thing she was thinking. At exactly 11:30 there was a knock on their front door. Walter opened it and found a young woman in a dark suit who showed him identification that said she worked for the Earth Defense Council. Agent Park was nervous and kept looking around as if she was afraid someone might be watching. She asked if she could come inside to discuss a matter of galactic security. Walter let her in, and Dorothy served tea and cookies, while Agent Park opened her briefcase and took out a tablet computer. She played the video from Kepler 442b again, and then showed them photographs of the Vorthan royal family. Agent Park explained that the Earth government had decided to respond to the massacre with a targeted assassination mission. The goal was to eliminate the entire Vorthan royal family as punishment for ordering the deaths of innocent humans, including children. The problem was that no human had ever successfully infiltrated the Vorthan homeworld. The planet Nexus Prime was protected by 3 space fleets and energy shields and sensor networks that could detect any ship or weapon or explosive device known to human technology. The royal palace was built inside a mountain of black crystal and guarded by the best soldiers in the Vorthan Empire. Every military expert and intelligence analyst had studied the problem and concluded that it was impossible. No human strike team could get close enough to the royal family to carry out the mission. Any attempt would result in the deaths of the human agents and give the Vorthans another propaganda victory. Agent Park looked very uncomfortable as she explained why she had come to visit 2 retired old people. The Earth Defense Council had reviewed the files of every black operations agent who had ever lived and concluded that Walter and Dorothy Kim were the only humans who might possibly have a chance of completing this mission. Their age would be an advantage because no one would suspect elderly humans of being dangerous. Their years of experience had taught them skills that no younger agent possessed. They knew how to improvise weapons from common materials, and how to kill without leaving evidence, and how to escape from situations that seemed hopeless. But Agent Park was honest about the fact that this was almost certainly a suicide mission. Even if Walter and Dorothy could somehow get onto Nexus Prime and reach the royal palace and eliminate their targets, they would probably never make it home alive. The Earth government was asking them to sacrifice their lives for revenge. Walter listened to the entire briefing without asking any questions. When Agent Park finished talking, the house was quiet, except for the sound of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Dorothy poured more tea and offered Agent Park another cookie. The young agent was clearly surprised by how calm the old couple seemed. Dorothy asked to see the video footage one more time, and Agent Park played it again on her tablet. When it showed Prince Kekstar laughing while standing over the body of little Wooklee, Dorothy made a soft sound in her throat that Agent Park did not recognize, but Walter knew that sound and what it meant. For 45 years, Dorothy had wanted children of her own, but the dangerous nature of their work had made it impossible to have a family. Instead, she had spent her life protecting other people's children by eliminating threats before they could cause harm. She had always said that anyone who hurt innocent children deserved whatever happened to them. Walter looked at his wife and saw something in her eyes that he had not seen for 20 years since their last mission. The gentle old woman who fed birds and tended flowers was gone, and in her place was the deadly agent who had once walked into a fortress on Mars and eliminated 12 enemy commanders without firing a single shot. Dorothy set down her teacup and spoke in a voice that was suddenly much younger and much more dangerous. She asked Agent Park when they would leave and what kind of resources would be available for the mission. The young agent looked confused because she had expected the old couple to refuse or at least ask for time to think about it. Walter explained that they had already made their decision. The moment they saw those dead children on the video, they knew what they had to do. It did not matter that they were old, or that they would probably die, or that the mission was supposed to be impossible. Some things were more important than personal safety agent. Park opened another folder and showed them detailed plans of the Vorthon homeworld and the royal palace. She explained that they would travel to Nexus Prime disguised as human scientists who were part of a prisoner exchange program. The Vorthons had captured 2 human researchers, and Earth was offering to trade scientific knowledge for their release. The cover story would be that Walter and Dorothy were xenobiologists from Earth University who wanted to study Vorthon physiology and culture. The aliens found human science amusing and would probably agree to let the old scientists visit their homeworld as propaganda to show how superior Vorthon civilization was compared to human civilization. Walter and Dorothy would have 3 days maximum to complete their mission before their cover identities would be investigated and discovered. They would be on their own, with no backup and no way to escape if something went wrong. The Earth government would deny any knowledge of the mission if they were captured. Agent Park asked if they had any questions or if they needed time to say goodbye to their family. Walter and Dorothy looked at each other and smiled the same way they had smiled before. Every dangerous mission for 30 years. They told Agent Park they were ready to leave immediately. The young agent seemed surprised that 2 elderly people could make such a serious decision so quickly. She did not understand that Walter and Dorothy, Kim, had been preparing for this moment their entire lives. Every mission they had ever completed had been practice for the day when someone would kill innocent humans and need to pay the price. Dorothy went upstairs to pack a small bag with the clothes and medicines that an old woman scientist would carry. Walter went to the garage and opened a hidden compartment behind his workbench where he kept certain items from their previous life. Agent Park watched nervously as the harmless old man selected tools that looked like ordinary objects but were actually deadly weapons. When they were ready to leave, Walter locked the front door, and Dorothy left food and water for the birds in case they did not return. They walked to Agent Park's car like any old couple going on a trip to visit relatives. The neighbors who saw them leave waved and smiled and had no idea they would never see Walter and Dorothy Kim again. The 3rd day started exactly like the previous 2 days, with Walter and Dorothy eating breakfast in the palace dining hall, while Vorthon servants brought them strange alien food that they pretended to enjoy. They smiled and thanked their hosts, and asked innocent questions about Vorthon culture, while secretly reviewing their mental maps of the palace layout. The royal family followed their usual morning routine. Emperor Vexmoth held court in the great throne room surrounded by his children and grandchildren who came to report on their various duties. Princess Nala commanded the space fleet from the military command center, while Prince Kextar trained with elite soldiers in the combat arena. Walter and Dorothy had exactly 8 hours before their diplomatic transport would arrive to take them back to human space. 8 hours to eliminate 17 members of the most protected family in the known galaxy. 8 hours to balance the scales for the massacre of innocent children on Kepler 442b. They started with Prince Dex, who was the youngest and least important member of the royal family. He spent his mornings alone in the palace gardens, studying the exotic plants that his family had collected from conquered worlds. The garden was far from the main palace and had only 2 guards who were used to seeing the elderly human woman who had visited yesterday. Dorothy walked slowly through the garden paths, carrying her large purse and wearing her thick glasses. She moved, like an old woman who had trouble with her balance and stopped frequently to rest on stone benches. The guards barely looked at her because she had been there before and seemed completely harmless. Prince Dex was examining a rare flower from the outer rim when Dorothy approached him with her usual friendly smile. She asked questions about the plant's toxins in her broken Vorthon language while fumbling in her purse for her camera. The prince was happy to show off his knowledge to this primitive, human female. Dorothy accidentally bumped into Prince Dex while trying to take a photograph and apologized for her clumsiness. The prince assured her that no harm was done and continued explaining the properties of poisonous plants he never felt. The tiny needle that Dorothy had used to inject him with a substance derived from the very toxins he was describing. The prince continued talking for almost 10 minutes before the poison reached his heart. The guards found him collapsed among his beloved flowers, apparently having suffered a massive cardiac failure. The palace physicians were puzzled because young Vorthons rarely had heart problems, but stress from the ongoing war with humans might have weakened his system. Meanwhile, Walter was visiting the palace library where Princess Yila was working on translating ancient texts into modern Vorthan language. She was happy to see the elderly human scientist who had been so interested in their history and culture yesterday and invited him to examine some rare manuscripts. The library had only 2 guards who were stationed near the main entrance. Walter appeared to have trouble reading the alien text and asked Princess Yila to help him understand certain passages. He leaned close to the manuscripts and adjusted his thick glasses frequently while she explained the meaning of various symbols. Princess Yila never noticed that Walter had crushed several flower petals from the garden into a fine powder and mixed it with the ink used for writing on the ancient papers. The powder was absorbed through her skin when she touched the manuscripts and began affecting her nervous system within minutes. She started feeling dizzy and confused, but attributed it to spending too much time reading in the dim library lighting. Walter expressed concern for her health and suggested she should rest. The princess agreed and lay down on a couch in the corner of the library. The guards assumed she was taking a nap and did not disturb her. The poison worked slowly and peacefully. Princess Yila fell into a deep sleep and never woke up. The doctors would later conclude that she had died from a rare genetic disorder that sometimes affected members of the royal bloodline. The condition had never been seen before, but Vorthan medicine was not perfect. By noon, 2 members of the royal family were dead, but no one suspected that the deaths were connected. The palace security chief noted the coincidence in his daily report, but saw no reason for alarm. Young royals sometimes had health problems, and stress from ruling an empire could affect anyone. Dorothy spent the afternoon visiting the palace museums, where several royal children worked as curators and historians. Prince Rex Tar was showing her ancient weapons that Vorthan warriors had used to conquer other species. He was proud of his ancestors' achievements and enjoyed impressing this elderly human with stories of alien superiority. The museum had excellent security, but the guards were focused on protecting the valuable artifacts, not watching an old woman who seemed interested in learning about Vorthan culture. Dorothy admired the display cases, while Prince Rex Tar explained how each weapon had been used. To defeat inferior species, she accidentally dropped her purse and several medicine bottles scattered across the floor. Prince Rex Tar helped her collect the pills, while she apologized for being so clumsy. One of the bottles contained medication that looked exactly like the vitamins that many Vorthans took to maintain their health. Dorothy thanked him for his kindness and put the bottles back in her purse. Prince Rex Tar never realized that one of his own vitamin bottles was now in Dorothy's purse and one of her poison bottles was in his pocket. That evening, he would take what he thought was his usual health supplement and die quietly in his sleep from what appeared to be a rare allergic reaction. Walter was in the engineering section of the palace asking technical questions about the life support systems. The chief engineer was happy to explain how their advanced technology maintained perfect air quality throughout the massive crystal structure. Walter appeared fascinated by the complexity of the atmospheric controls. The engineer showed him the main environmental processing unit that filtered and cleaned the air for the entire royal wing of the palace. Walter asked many questions about safety systems and emergency procedures while secretly noting which valves and switches controlled the airflow to specific rooms. During the tour, Walter accidentally bumped into a control panel while trying to get a better look at the sophisticated machinery. His clumsy movement caused a tiny device to fall behind the panel where no one would ever find it. The device would activate later that night and introduce a colorless, odorless gas into the air system. Prince Loktar and Princess Mira lived in the royal wing and would be the first to breathe the modified air. The gas was designed to mimic the effects of a rare Vorthan lung disease that caused respiratory failure during sleep. Both royals would be found dead in their beds in the morning, and doctors would blame a genetic condition by evening. 4 members of the royal family had been eliminated, but the deaths appeared to be natural causes or accidents. The palace physicians were concerned about the unusual number of health problems affecting the royals, but had no reason to suspect murder. The security chief increased patrols slightly and ordered additional medical examinations for all family members, but he was looking for signs of illness or genetic disorders, not elderly human assassins who used methods that left no trace of violence. Walter and Dorothy attended dinner in the Great Hall where Emperor Vexmoth expressed sympathy for the tragic losses that had struck his family that day. The old emperor was worried about the health of his remaining children and grandchildren and announced that he was calling in medical experts from across the empire. Prince Kextar sat beside his father and assured him that the deaths were probably just unfortunate coincidence. The prince looked directly at Walter and Dorothy and made jokes about how amusing it was to have weak human scientists visiting during such a difficult time for the royal family. Dorothy smiled politely while Prince Kextar laughed about the pathetic humans who had died on Kepler 442b. She nodded and appeared interested when he described how human children had begged for mercy before he executed them. The translation computer turned his clicking laughter into human words. Walter listened carefully while Prince Kextar bragged about his military victories and explained how superior Vorthon warriors could easily defeat any human force. The prince never noticed that the elderly human was memorizing every detail about his daily schedule and personal habits. That night, Walter and Dorothy lay in their beds knowing they had successfully eliminated 4 targets without raising suspicion. But 13 members of the royal family were still alive, including Prince Kextar, who had personally murdered the Lee children. They had less than 18 hours to complete their mission. Dorothy used hand signals to indicate that they needed to accelerate their timeline. Walter agreed and pointed toward the wall that separated their quarters from the main palace. They would have to take greater risks and abandon some of their careful planning. The hunt was about to become much more dangerous. But Walter and Dorothy Kim had not survived 30 years of impossible missions by playing it safe. They had come to this alien world to deliver justice for murdered human children, and nothing would stop them from completing their task. Tomorrow, the Vorthon royal family would learn that some humans were much more dangerous than they appeared, and that killing innocent children came with a price that would be paid in full. The 4th morning brought terrible news to the royal palace. 4 more members of the imperial family had been found dead in their beds during the night. Prince Loktar and Princess Mira had apparently died from respiratory failure, while Prince Rextar had suffered a fatal allergic reaction, and Princess Hyla had been discovered collapsed in her private study. Emperor Vexmoth was no longer willing to believe that 8 deaths in 3 days could be coincidence. He called an emergency meeting of the surviving royal family members and ordered them to gather in the great throne room, which was the most secure location in the entire palace. The throne room was a massive chamber carved from black crystal, with walls 50 feet high and a domed ceiling that showed images of Vorthon military victories. The floor was polished stone that reflected the purple light from the alien sun streaming through crystal windows. Guards in full battle armor lined every wall, carrying energy weapons that could cut through steel force fields, protected every entrance and exit, while sensors monitored every breath and heartbeat in the room. Computer systems scanned for any metal object or electronic device or chemical compound that might be used as a weapon. The security was designed to protect against armies, not elderly human scientists. 11 members of the royal family remained alive, and they sat in chairs arranged in a semicircle facing the crystal throne where Emperor Vexmoth stood. With his forearms raised in anger, his red eyes glowed brighter than usual as he spoke in the clicking language that computers translated into words. The emperor declared that enemies were murdering his family, and he suspected that the human visitors were somehow responsible. Perhaps these elderly scientists were not as harmless as they appeared. Maybe Earth had sent assassins disguised as researchers to eliminate the royal bloodline in revenge for the massacre on Kepler 482b. Prince Kextar agreed with his father and suggested that the humans should be arrested immediately and questioned using methods that would force them to reveal the truth. The other family members nodded their approval because they were frightened by the mysterious deaths and wanted someone to blame. Emperor Vexmoth ordered his security chief to find the human visitors and bring them to the throne room for interrogation. The guards would search every room in the palace and use whatever force was necessary to capture the suspected assassins. Dead or alive did not matter, as long as the threat was eliminated. But when the security forces reached the guest quarters, they found only empty rooms with unmade beds and personal belongings left behind. Walter and Dorothy had vanished sometime during the night without triggering any alarms or leaving any trace of their escape. The most advanced security system in the galaxy had no record of their movements. The palace guards began a systematic search of every corridor and chamber and storage room in the massive crystal structure. They used heat sensors and motion detectors and scanning devices that could find a hidden insect. But somehow the two elderly humans had disappeared completely like smoke in the wind. What the Vorthons did not understand was that Walter and Dorothy were no longer hiding. They had abandoned their disguises as harmless scientists and become what they truly were, instruments of death with 70 years of combined experience in killing people who deserved to die. The ventilation system above the throne room had been designed to be impossible to access from inside the palace. But Walter had spent 2 days studying the blueprints while pretending to admire alien engineering. He knew exactly which panels could be removed and which passages led to the chamber where the royal family was gathered. Dorothy moved through the air ducts like a spider crawling through her web. Her small frame allowed her to navigate spaces that would be impossible for younger, larger operatives. She carried no metal weapons that sensors could detect, only items that appeared to be medical supplies and sewing materials. Walter approached through maintenance tunnels that ran behind the crystal walls. These passages were used by robots for repairs and cleaning, and were not monitored by security cameras because no living creature was supposed to be able to access them. But Walter had learned to move like a machine, when necessary. The royal family sat in their secure chamber surrounded by dozens of guards and protected by force fields and scanning systems that could detect the smallest threat. They felt safe in their crystal fortress, believing that no human could possibly reach them in the most defended room on the planet. Emperor Vexmoth was giving orders to his military commanders when the lights went out. The backup power systems activated immediately, but for 3 seconds the throne room was in complete darkness. In those 3 seconds, Walter and Dorothy struck with the precision of surgeons and the speed of lightning. Dorothy dropped from a ventilation grate directly above the crystal chandelier that hung over the center of the room. Birawi landed silently on the massive light fixture and immediately began throwing small objects that looked like medicine pills, but exploded on contact with Vorthon's skin. The guards opened fire with their energy weapons, but Dorothy was already moving, swinging from the chandelier to crystal pillars and using the ornate decorations as cover. Her movements were fluid and graceful, like a dancer who had rehearsed every step for decades. Walter emerged from a hidden panel behind the Emperor's throne, moving so quickly that the nearest guards had no time to react. His hand struck pressure points on Vorthon's necks with surgical precision. Each blow was calculated to cause maximum damage to alien physiology that he had studied for 3 days. The alien warriors were 8 feet tall with 4 arms and advanced weapons, but they had never fought opponents who moved like Walter and Dorothy. The two humans seemed to anticipate every attack and counter every move, as if they had been fighting fourth-hands their entire lives. Prince Kextar drew his ceremonial sword and charged toward Walter, thinking that his superior size and strength would easily defeat an elderly human. The prince had killed hundreds of humans during his military career, and had never met one who could challenge a trained Vorthon warrior. Walter waited until the prince was close enough to see his eyes, then spoke the only words he said during the entire battle. "This is for the Lee family." The prince swung his sword in a killing blow that should have cut the old human in half, but Walter was no longer there. The blade passed through empty air, while Walter moved behind Prince Kextar faster than the alien eye could follow. His hand found the nerve cluster at the base of the prince's neck and applied pressure with exactly the right amount of force. The prince collapsed without making a sound. Dorothy had eliminated 6 guards and was working on the 7th when Princess Nala tried to activate an emergency beacon that would call for reinforcements from the space fleet. The princess was a military commander who understood tactics and knew that the humans had to be stopped before they could escape. But Dorothy had anticipated this move and had already disabled the communication systems during her reconnaissance. The beacon produced no signal and no help was coming. The royal family was alone with 2 of the most dangerous humans who had ever lived. The battle lasted exactly 9 minutes and 43 seconds. When the shooting stopped, 11 members of the Vorthon royal family lay dead on the crystal floor, along with 37 elite guards who had been trained to protect them against any threat, except elderly humans with arthritis. Walter and Dorothy stood among the bodies, breathing hard but uninjured. Their clothes were torn and their gray hair was disheveled, but they had completed their mission. The massacre of innocent children on Kepler 442b had been answered with the elimination of every Vorthan royal who had ordered or celebrated those deaths. Emperor Vexmoth was still alive but barely breathing, from a wound that Walter had carefully calculated to be fatal, but not immediate. The old alien looked up at the two humans with his 4 red eyes and tried to speak, but only clicking sounds came from his throat. Dorothy knelt beside the dying emperor and spoke to him in perfect Vorthan language without using the translation computer. "You killed our children, so we killed yours." She paused and looked directly into his alien eyes. "Earth considers this matter settled." The emperor died while Dorothy was speaking, and his last sight was the face of an elderly human woman who had just destroyed his entire bloodline in less than 10 minutes. He finally understood that humans were not the weak, inferior creatures that Vorthan propaganda had described. Dorothy activated the palace's broadcast system, the same network that Prince Kextar had used to transmit the massacre, from Kepler 442b to human worlds. She wanted every Vorthan in the Empire to see what had happened to their royal family and understand the price of killing human children. The cameras showed the throne room filled with alien bodies, while 2 old humans stood calmly among the carnage. Dorothy looked directly into the main camera and repeated her message in the Vorthan language, so there would be no misunderstanding about why this had happened. Walter checked his watch and nodded to his wife. They had 15 minutes before security forces from other parts of the palace would break through the sealed doors. The force fields and barriers that had been designed to keep enemies out were now keeping rescue forces from getting in. They walked toward a maintenance shaft that Walter had identified during his tour of the engineering systems. The shaft led to the palace's waste disposal system, which connected to underground tunnels that ran beneath the journey to Nexus Prime took 6 days traveling through hyperspace in a small diplomatic ship. The Vorthans had agreed to the prisoner exchange and were expecting 2 elderly human scientists to arrive at their homeworld to study alien culture and biology. Walter and Dorothy spent the time reviewing everything that was known about Vorthan society and the layout of the royal palace. The planet Nexus Prime looked like a giant purple jewel hanging in space. It was surrounded by 3 rings of warships that could destroy any attacking fleet before it got close to the surface. Energy shields protected the atmosphere, and sensor networks watched every approach route. The planet itself was mostly covered by cities built from black crystal that reflected the light of the purple sun. The royal palace sat on top of the highest mountain like a crown made of dark spears reaching toward the sky. It had been built by Vorthan kings over thousands of years and was supposed to be impossible to attack. Every wall was made of crystal harder than diamond, and every room was protected by guards and sensors and automatic weapons. When their ship landed at the main spaceport, Walter and Dorothy were met by a group of Vorthan officials who looked exactly like the aliens in the videos from Kepler 442b. They were 8 feet tall with 4 arms and red glowing eyes and hard shells covering their bodies. They spoke in clicking sounds that the translation computers turned into words. The lead official was called Commander Rex, who was in charge of security for visiting aliens. He looked down at the 2 elderly humans with amusement, clearly thinking that these soft, weak creatures could never be dangerous. Walter leaned heavily on a walking stick, and Dorothy carried a large purse full of medicine bottles and reading glasses. Commander Rex explained the rules for their visit. They would be allowed to tour certain parts of the royal palace and interview Vorthan citizens about their culture and history. They would always be accompanied by guards and were forbidden from entering restricted areas. Their communications with Earth would be monitored, and they could not leave the palace grounds. A transport vehicle took them through the Crystal City toward the royal palace. Walter and Dorothy pressed their faces against the windows like tourists amazed by alien architecture. Dorothy took photographs with an old camera and asked their guide questions about Vorthan history in broken alien language. The palace was even more impressive up close, with towers and bridges and gardens that seemed to float in the air. The main entrance was guarded by dozens of soldiers carrying energy weapons. Each door was protected by scanning devices that could detect any metal or explosive or electronic device that might be used as a weapon. Walter and Dorothy were searched carefully by the security systems, which found nothing suspicious in their belongings. The guards were looking for guns and bombs and computer viruses, But they did not recognize the ordinary objects that two old spies had learned to turn into deadly weapons over 30 years of missions. They were given rooms in the guest quarters of the palace which were comfortable, but clearly designed to keep visitors under observation. Every wall had hidden cameras and microphones, and the doors could be locked from the outside if necessary. Walter and Dorothy unpacked their clothes and medicines like any elderly couple settling into a hotel. That evening they attended a formal dinner with several members of the Vorthan royal family, including Prince Kex-Tar, who had personally killed the Lee family on Kepler 442b. The prince sat at the head of a long table, made from black crystal, and bragged about his victory over the weak humans who had dared to mine in Vorthan territory. Dorothy listened politely while Prince Kex-Tar described how human children had cried before he executed them. She smiled, and nodded and asked questions about Vorthan military tactics through the translation computer. The prince found it amusing that this elderly human female wanted to understand superior alien warfare. Walter appeared fascinated by the palace technology and asked many questions about their energy systems and communication networks and security procedures. The Vorthan engineers were happy to show off their advanced science to primitive humans who could barely travel between stars during the tour. Walter memorized the location of every guard post and sensor station and power junction, while pretending to be impressed by alien engineering. Dorothy studied the daily routines of the royal family members and noted which ones traveled alone and which ones were always surrounded by bodyguards. The Vorthans never suspected that these harmless-looking old humans were actually mapping every weakness in their supposedly impregnable fortress. The aliens believed their own propaganda about human inferiority and could not imagine that elderly scientists might be capable of violence. On the second day, Walter and Dorothy were allowed to visit the palace library where ancient Vorthan texts were kept. The librarian was a young royal named Princess Yila, who enjoyed showing primitive humans the vast knowledge that alien civilization had accumulated over millions of years. While Princess Yila explained the history of Vorthan conquests, Dorothy quietly noted that the library had only 2 guards and multiple exits that led to different parts of the palace. Walter discovered that the environmental control systems for this section of the building could be accessed through maintenance panels hidden behind the ancient bookcases. That afternoon, they toured the palace gardens where several royal family members liked to walk and meditate among exotic plants from across the Vorthan Empire. Dorothy admired the beautiful flowers while identifying which ones were poisonous and which ones could be turned into weapons with simple chemistry. The garden supervisor was Prince Dex, who was the youngest son of the emperor and considered the least important member of the royal family. He enjoyed talking to the elderly human woman about botany and did not notice that she was asking very specific questions about plant toxins and their effects on Vorthan physiology. Walter spent time in the engineering sections of the palace, where he met the technicians who maintained the massive computer systems that controlled everything from door locks to life support. His hearing aid seemed to malfunction, frequently requiring him to get very close to sensitive equipment to hear explanations. The Vorthan engineers found it amusing that this old human needed such primitive technology to hear properly. They never noticed the tiny devices he planted while adjusting his hearing aid, or realized that he now had complete access to their security networks. By the end of the second day, Walter and Dorothy had identified 17 members of the royal family and learned their daily schedules and personal habits. They knew which guards could be avoided and which systems could be disabled and which routes led to emergency exits. That night, they lay in their separate beds in the guest quarters and used hand signals to communicate, because they knew the rooms were monitored. Dorothy held up 3 fingers to indicate they had 3 targets for tomorrow. Walter nodded and pointed to his watch, showing that timing would be critical. The Vorthans believed they were perfectly safe in their crystal fortress, surrounded by armies and protected by technology that no human could understand. They never imagined that 2 70-year-old people with arthritis and bad hearing could threaten the most powerful family in their empire. But Walter and Dorothy Kim had spent decades learning that the best disguise was always hiding in plain sight. Everyone expected spies to be young and strong, and equipped with advanced weapons. No one suspected that the most dangerous humans might be old people with walking sticks and medicine bottles. The royal family went to sleep that night thinking about how amusing it would be to show these pathetic human scientists to other alien species as examples of human weakness and ignorance. They planned to make propaganda videos showing how eager humans were to beg for alien knowledge. Prince Kex. Tar fell asleep laughing about the questions the old, human woman had asked about his military victories. He thought it was hilarious that she wanted to understand how superior aliens defeated inferior humans. He never considered that she might be studying his methods for a different reason. Princess. Ela dreamed about the grateful expression on the elderly human male's face when she explained advanced Vorthon science to him. She felt proud of being so generous to such primitive creatures. She did not realize that his gratitude had been carefully calculated to make her trust him. Emperor Vex Moth was pleased with how well the prisoner exchange was working. The human government would see that Vorthons were civilized enough to allow scientific cooperation, and might be more willing to negotiate, surrender when they realized how advanced alien technology was compared to human science. None of them understood that they had just spent 2 days giving complete access to their home and their families and their secrets to two of the most dangerous humans who had ever lived. The massacre of innocent children on Kepler 442b was about to be answered, and the Vorthon royal family would learn what happened when you made humans angry. The broadcast from the Vorthon royal palace reached every corner of the galaxy within hours. Billions of aliens across thousands of worlds watched in stunned silence as the images showed the most powerful family in known space lying dead in their own throne room, killed by two elderly humans who had walked into an impregnable fortress. Dorothy's message was translated into every major language and transmitted through every communication network. "You killed our children, so we killed yours. Earth considers this matter settled." The words were simple, but their meaning sent shockwaves through alien civilizations that had never imagined humans capable of such precision and ruthlessness. On the Vorthon homeworld, chaos erupted immediately. The entire royal bloodline had been eliminated in a single day, leaving no clear successor to the imperial throne. Military commanders began fighting each other for control, while planetary governors declared independence from the central government. The 3 space fleets that protected Nexus Prime turned their weapons on each other as different admirals claimed the right to rule the empire. Civil war consumed Vorthon space within weeks, as generals and politicians fought over the fragments of what had once been the most feared alien power in the galaxy. Meanwhile, Walter and Dorothy Kim disappeared into the underground tunnel system beneath the Crystal City. They moved through sewage pipes and maintenance shafts and abandoned mining tunnels that had been carved into the mountains millions of years ago. Their route had been planned during their reconnaissance and led to an old spaceport on the far side of the planet. The Vorthon security forces searched for them desperately using every available soldier and scanning device and tracking system. But the 2 humans seemed to have vanished completely. The palace guards found evidence of their escape route but lost the trail in the maze of tunnels beneath the city. Some reports claimed that an old cargo ship had left the abandoned spaceport around the time of the massacre, but the vessel had used outdated transponder codes and disappeared into hyperspace before anyone could intercept it. The ship was never seen again, and its destination remained unknown. Other stories said that Walter and Dorothy had died fighting their way out of the palace, and that their bodies had been vaporized by energy weapons. The Vorthon government preferred this version because it suggested that the humans had paid for their crimes with their lives. But the truth was that nobody knew what had happened to the 2 elderly assassins who had destroyed the most protected family in alien space. They had appeared from nowhere, completed an impossible mission, and vanished like ghosts, leaving behind only death and a message that terrified every species in the galaxy. The impact of the royal family's elimination went far beyond the collapse of the Vorthon Empire. Every alien civilization that had considered humans to be weak and primitive suddenly began reevaluating their assumptions. The massacre on Kepler 442b had been intended to show human inferiority, but the response had demonstrated something entirely different. Species that had been planning attacks on human colonies immediately canceled their military operations. No government wanted to risk the possibility that Earth might send more elderly assassins to eliminate their leadership. The idea of humans who looked harmless but could kill entire royal families became a nightmare that haunted alien rulers. The Krillian Federation had been preparing to invade 3 human mining worlds, but their council voted unanimously to seek peaceful trade agreements instead. The Zephyrian Empire withdrew their battle fleets from human space, and offered to negotiate border treaties. The hegemony of worlds canceled their plans to enslave human populations. Diplomatic relations between humans and aliens changed overnight. Where once alien ambassadors had been arrogant and demanding, they now approached human representatives with careful respect. Nobody wanted to be the next species that discovered what happened when you made humanity angry. The story of Walter and Dorothy Kim became legend among human colonies. Even though their names were never officially revealed, people whispered about the old couple who had avenged the deaths of innocent children. Statues appeared in parks and schools showing elderly figures with the inscription, "They remembered our children on Earth." The government neither confirmed nor denied that they had sent assassins to eliminate the Vorthan royal family. Official statements claimed that the deaths were the result of internal Vorthan politics and that Earth had no involvement in alien civil wars. But in the classified files of the Earth Defense Council, there was a single report marked "Mission Accomplished" and signed with 2 names that had been crossed out in black ink. The report contained no details about methods or casualties, but noted that the objective had been achieved within the specified time frame. Years later, when other species asked human diplomats about the incident, they would receive the same response: Earth does not discuss matters of galactic security. But every alien who heard those words understood the real message. Harm our people and face the consequences. The house in Atlanta, where Walter and Dorothy Kim had lived, remained empty. For months after their disappearance, neighbors assumed the old couple had gone to visit relatives or moved to a retirement home. Nobody thought to ask why their garden was overgrown and their mail was piling up. Agent Park visited the house several times looking for any clue about what had happened to the 2 operatives, but found nothing, except bird feeders that needed refilling and tomato plants that were dying from lack of water. The couple had vanished as completely as if they had never existed. Some intelligence analysts believed that Walter and Dorothy had died on Nexus Prime, and that their bodies had been destroyed to prevent them from becoming martyrs. Others thought they had escaped and were living quietly, somewhere under new identities. The truth became one of the great mysteries of the intelligence community, but on certain quiet evenings when the wind was just right, neighbors claimed they could hear the sound of someone working in the garden behind the empty house. They said it sounded like an elderly couple talking softly, while they watered plants and fed birds' children who lived on the street. Sometimes reported seeing lights in the windows late at night, or catching glimpses of gray-haired figures moving through the rooms. But when adults investigated, they found only dust and shadows and the lingering scent of flowers. The story became part of human folklore passed down through generations of families who lived in the outer colonies. Parents would tell their children about the old couple who had traveled across the galaxy to protect human families. They became symbols of the idea that no child would ever be forgotten or unavenged. The massacre on Kepler 442b was remembered too, but now it was told differently. The Lee family and the other colonists who died became martyrs, whose deaths had triggered a response that changed the balance of power in the galaxy. Their sacrifice had shown every species that humans would go to any length to protect their innocent. The Vorthan Empire never recovered from the loss of their royal family. Civil war raged for decades as different factions fought for control. The once mighty alien power fractured into dozens of small kingdoms that spent more time fighting each other than threatening human space. Prince Kextar, who had laughed while killing human children, became a cautionary tale told by alien parents to their offspring. His name was synonymous with the folly of underestimating humanity and the price of cruelty toward innocence. The broader lesson echoed throughout the galaxy for generations. Any species that considered attacking human civilians remembered the story of how 2 elderly people had infiltrated an impregnable fortress and eliminated an entire royal bloodline. The message was clear and permanent. Humans might appear weak and peaceful, but they possessed something that made them uniquely dangerous. They would never forget an injury to their children, and they would never stop until justice was served. It did not matter how far they had to travel, or how impossible the odds seemed. The galaxy had learned that humanity's greatest weapon was not their technology or their armies, but their absolute refusal to let innocent deaths go unanswered. Walter and Dorothy Kim had delivered that message in the most direct way possible. And every alien species understood, In the end, the Lee family was avenged not by mighty warships or advanced weapons, but by two old people who remembered what it meant to be human. They had shown the galaxy that some things were more important than personal safety, and that love for children could drive ordinary people to accomplish impossible things. The stars themselves seemed different after that day, as if the universe had been reminded that justice existed, and that it sometimes wore the face of elderly humans with arthritis and hearing aids who tended gardens and fed birds and never let anyone hurt their children without paying the full price.